Hi everyone. This video's goal is to understand the difference between Axios and Fetch. These are two popular ways to hit a backend server and get back response from there. For example, we have our sum server that we've used many times now that gives you a randomly generated list of to-dos anytime you hit this specific endpoint. The way to hit this endpoint, until now, we've seen only one way, which is using Fetch, that both the browser and Node.js natively provides you. What do I mean when I say natively? I mean, if I click on inspect here and go to the console, if I type fetch, it shows me fetch exists as a function. I can actually call fetch, pass in the URL and get back the response. We have seen this syntax a few times. I will show this very soon here as well. Similarly, if I go to my terminal and type node, and you can try the same on your side if you have node installed. If I type fetch, it says fetch is an asynchronous function that you can call. The same is not true for Axios. If I type Axios, it says Axios is undefined. Same is true here in the browser as well. The reason for this is Axios is an external library that really smart people have written to make it easy to send HTTP requests, because the syntax of fetch is a little weird and there are a few other extra things that Axios provides you and like a few libraries written on top of it. Other than the cleaner syntax, Axios provides you 5 different things that are sort of good to have in your project. This is why the popular way to send backend requests is Axios and not fetch. Let's write some code. This is a empty Node.js REPL. You can create one on your side. The way to do that is this. Go to repl.com, sign up or sign in, click on create REPL, select Node.js here and create this REPL. This basically is a playground for you to write some Node.js code, where we will be writing some code to see the difference between Axios and fetch. First thing, let's write some code to hit this endpoint and get back the number of to-dos that exist. All right. What do I have to do? Write a function. Let's call it main, which when called needs to log the number of to-dos that exist. The way to do that using fetch is send a fetch request, which returns a promise. What does fetch return you? It returns a promise, which is why you can either use this syntax dot then response, convert this response into JSON, fetch the JSON part of this specific response, because we know that this specific server endpoint returns you JSON. If we thought this returned us something else, we would have called this different function right here. For example, something like response.text and awaited on it. Why did we have to await on it? Because response.json, converting this response that fetch got into JSON is an asynchronous function. Why? Just how the maintainers have written it, unfortunately. Should it be asynchronous? Probably not. It's just parsing out some text and converting it into JSON. So ideally shouldn't be asynchronous. But since this is asynchronous, you have to await on it. If you don't await on it, what will get stored in this will be a promise. If I log JSON here and if I run, you will see promise pending got logged. If I await on it though, and if I run, then you will see the actual object got logged. So if you are using the fetch syntax, then you first have to make the call, and once the call succeeds, you have to make another asynchronous call to convert it into JSON, and then you finally get access to JSON, which you can, in our case, log this so that your assignment is done. This will log the total number of to-dos on the server, which, as you can see right now, it says 0 because it's randomly generated. It's a randomly generated string. Sorry, randomly generated to-dos. So the list keeps on changing. If I run it again and again, I'll get a different set of to-dos from the server. This is the syntax. Again, look at it. To hit a backend server and get back a response if you are using fetch. Can we write this a different way, Harkirat? Yes. There are a few different ways you can write this same code. This is the complete promise syntax using .then. You can also make this function asynchronous, and then you can make this syntax slightly cleaner. Let me write this below so you can compare both the functions. Const response equal to await fetch. This function and this function both do the same thing. They both send out a fetch request, get back a response, convert it into JSON, and log the number of to-dos on the server. Same thing happening here and here. If I comment this out and run it, you will see again one got logged, and then the same number will get logged based on how many to-dos you got back from the server. This syntax, as you can see, is slightly cleaner compared to this syntax, which is why usually if you have the choice, you should prefer writing the async await syntax rather than writing the .then syntax. All right. This is a great start. We have a simple function that can send a request to the backend using the native fetch functionality. But what did I say? Axios is another library that lets you do the same thing and in a slightly more cleaner fashion. Let's see how. First thing, since Axios is an external library, you have to import it. Const Axios equal to require Axios. Let me clean the code a bit. Let's just have this main function right here. And now let's write the same backend call again using the Axios library. The way to do that is Axios dot, if you're sending a get request, then Axios dot get. If you're sending a post request, it would have been Axios dot post. We'll see how post requests and put requests compare in both of these. Let's kick things off with just an Axios dot get. If I write Axios dot get here, the good thing is Axios is a much smarter library compared to fetch. It will automatically understand the data that's coming back is JSON, so you don't have to do this. You just have to do this. Whenever you're using Axios, you will get access to the final thing here in response.data. Where did you get access to the final thing here? You got it by awaiting on a function. You awaited on response.json and then you got back the final JSON data. But Axios makes it much more cleaner, as you can see. You, in a single line of code, are able to send the request, get back the response, and then response.data has your final JSON data. You do not have to do this extra step that you have to do here in fetch. This is just how the maintainers of Axios have sort of taken away the pain of, doing two calls, because if you know the data that's coming back is JSON, Axios can itself understand and parse it and return you the final data in response.data, right? This is the big difference between fetch and Axios, which is how the syntax is written. Axios gives you 10 different things, which we'll see very soon. But the very first difference between both of them is the syntax and how clean the syntax of Axios is compared to that of fetch. So if I run it now, it's first installing Axios, as you can see, npm install Axios. And then once it is installed, it is able to send the same request, get back the same response. Try to compare both of them. And you will see, at least for me, the syntax below is much cleaner because in a single line of code, I get access to the data, versus here, I have to do 2 lines of code. Now, let's look at some other things. How can you send a post request here versus here? If you want to send a post request here, the way to do that is this. You send in a second argument here, and the method you set as post. Get is the thing that's present there by default. If you want to make it post or put, this is how you change the method. How do you do the same thing here? Rather than doing axios.get, you can do axios.post or axios.put or axios.delete. Whatever is the request type that you want to send. The way to specify it here is this. The way to specify it here is this Axios dot, just make that specific function call. So let's find an endpoint that we can hit. Post endpoint example. Let's see if we can find a good post endpoint. Post test endpoint. There you go. Seems like TopTal has one. If I send a get request here, it returns me something. I'm assuming the same happens for a post request. So let's see if that does happen. Send a request to toptal.com/developers/postbin/ a random endpoint. Let's do it just for fetch right now. Let me close this. So this is the request that I'm sending using fetch. Let's see what it logs. It'll probably throw an error. Yeah, because as you saw, what does this return you? It does not return you JSON. It returns you text. So how should this function call change? It should change to .text. If you know it is going to return you plain text, then this is the function call you have to make here. If you know it's going to return you JSON, then you have to do the JSON request. Let me just log JSON here, or whatever, let's call it textual data. And if I run it, on sending a post request, I get back this data right here. I can run it multiple times. You can also go to toptal.com/developers/postbin, and this will probably give you an endpoint that you can try out. Now let's try the same thing here. Here, as you saw, I had to change .json to .text based on what I expected the response to be, which means as the application developer, I need to upfront know कि भैया the response coming back is text or not. Versus in Axios, I can simply do this. Axios.post, hit the endpoint, and log response.data. And as you can see, the data got logged. I do not have to worry about making an extra call to .text or .json. Axios is able to parse it automatically. All right. This is the syntax difference between fetch and Axios. The other things you might worry about is, how can I send headers? The way to do that here is like this. The way to do that here in Axios is I think it is this only. I think it's small h only. We can confirm. The good thing is Axios is a very popular library, has all the documentation you need here. So you can go here and search for headers. So when you're sending a post request, sometimes you might want to send some data as well. So the way to do that here, if you remember, was this. Username Harkirat, password 123456. The way to do that here is you send the body as the second argument, and then the third argument can have the headers. So I can either do this. Okay, by the body that I'm sending, username is this, password is this, and the third object can have the headers. Written too much here, so let's try to log all of this. Let's try to create a quick HTTP server and then see if we are actually able to, hit that HTTP server. Does this header actually reach the HTTP server? Does this body actually reach the HTTP server? And these are the only high level things that you need in a library. You need to know how to change request method, which we know can be done by here. .post, .get, .delete, send body, which, as I said, can be the second argument here, and then send headers, which is the headers key in the third object here. All right. Let's try to log this though and actually see if this hits the server. So I'm assuming this works, but we don't have a real endpoint to test, whether or not username password is actually reaching the backend, whether or not headers are actually reaching the backend. So let's, there are a few ways to do it, by the way. You can also always search for request HTTP dump. There you go. HTTP dump is a website that lets you, as the name suggests, dump HTTP requests, which basically means if I went to this website http://dump.app and created my own dump, it will basically give me an endpoint, and any request that I send on this endpoint, it will log everything about that request here, the headers, the body, whatever you want to look at. So if I take this endpoint and if I put it here and if I run this, you will see it said a request came here. The body had this, the headers had the authorization bearer space 123, and it was a post request. Similarly, if I change this to a get request and send it, then you will see another dump here. Ki haan bhai, a get request came. So if I send some query parameters along $A = B, I can inspect that here as well. Ki haan bhai, there was some query parameters A = B, and then the headers. I don't see a header here because when you're sending a get request, then you cannot send the body. So the second argument cannot be the body. The second argument needs to be this request config. I keep saying request config here. This request config is what all do you want to send along with this, which you can put in this object. Headers is just one thing. You can put a bunch of other things here. But if you want to put the headers, if you're sending a get request, it will be the second argument. Now, if I send this, you will see the latest get that came has my authorization header bearer 123. So what did we learn? We learned that if you're sending a post request, then though the first argument is the URL that you're sending the request to, second argument is your body, and the third argument will contain your headers. But if you're sending a get request, in a get request, you can never send post body. You cannot send any request body in a get call. You can send query parameters if need be. You cannot send this body, which is why in a get request, the second argument contains headers. In a post or in a put or even in a delete, whatever request can send back a body, there the second argument is the body, third argument is the headers. Is this, as you can see, get request to github.com/axios/axios. The browser has no way for you to put some extra body here. So this is a property of a get request. Get request means you cannot send body. You can send query parameters. If you want to send some extra data, you can send via query parameters. You cannot send it via the body, which is why if you're doing a get request, the second argument will contain your headers. If you're doing a post request, then your second argument will be the body, and the third argument will contain your headers. Same for put. In a put request, you can send some body. In a delete request, you can send some body. Only in a get request, you cannot send somebody. But in a get request, you cannot. And so the second argument will be headers. In a post request, you can. So the second arguments will be the body. Third argument will contain your headers. All right. Let's see if I'm missing something. Another thing that you might want to know is another way to send requests is this. If you don't want to specify the method over here, you can simply do Axios URL, and then here you can be like method post. If you don't want to write the method here .get.post, which ideally you should, this is just another syntax. If you want to know, you can always be like Axios URL, and then this is my method, and then probably the third argument, if I'm being honest. We'll see. I'm just winging it here. Yeah, as you can see, post request came when I used this syntax await Axios method post. Did these headers work? Let's see. They did work as well. Then I can probably send body here. Username Kirat. Run. body, this is not the right way to send body. If you're doing just Axios, let's see what the right way is. Go here, search for it. It is data. So if you want to use this Axios syntax, oh, you can go even cleaner. You can basically do this. URL, headers, data, username, Hercules. So it really depends on how you want to write your Axios requests. You can write them like this as well, where you don't specify the method here. Everything you specify in a single object that is an argument. Axios, URL is this, method is this, headers are these, data is this. If I run it, if I check in the HTTP post bin dump, where is it? There you go. You will see it has the body, it has the header, it is a post request. If I change this to put, you will see a put request came with the same things. All right, that's it. That's all the syntax I wanted to discuss for Axios. Just get comfortable writing, axios.gets and axios.posts. And if you want to try out, use this http dump.app where you can dump all of your requests and see whenever you're doing a post call, what data is actually reaching here. Whenever you're doing a get call, what arguments are actually reaching here, so on and so forth. All right, with that, let's end it. I'll see you guys in the next one.